Hey, we are continuing week 2 of Hold Nothing Back, and the message today is called The Decision Point. But before we jump into today's topic, or what we're going to kind of discuss as a group and as a church, I wanted to kind of revisit what the whole series is about for those of you who missed it, or for those of you who are here and forgotten, because in a course of a week, a lot of different things go on. So we talked about this series being based off of our Hold Nothing Back DNA, and just to kind of revisit that and kind of level set with everyone, holding nothing back in our context and for our community, and as we kind of move into launching a church, is about this. It's recognizing how much we've been given by God. We look for every opportunity to give our finances, our resources, energy, and our time back to Him. And if you remember from last week, we kind of talked about this idea of like a feast or famine, that so long as you hold something back from God, you're withholding what God wants to give, or you're withholding from God what He's already given to you. That there's like, it's an all or nothing mindset. Like you can't hold nothing back while still holding on to something. And so holding nothing back is this idea that God has given to us out of His great riches, out of His love for us, out of His kindness for us. He's given to us far more than we could ever give back to Him. And so the only thing that makes sense is for us to just give Him our everything, because that's what He did for us. He led the way. He set the example in that. And so we talked about this imagery and this idea that, like, if you go to a feast, like someone has gone above and beyond to put everything out on the table, and it's not really a feast if you find out later or come to know that they've held something back, that they've said, no, I'm not going to put this out on the table, or I'm not going to provide this, because they've withheld something. It doesn't feel really like a feast. And we also talked about last week how we, like our team, our community, are the ones that really set the tone and set the example in this. That the people we lead, the people we reach, the people we'll connect to will only go as far as we have set the example to. So if we're holding something back, not only are they going to hold something back from us, but they're also going to hold something back from God. And so it's critical, it's crucial really that we as a community are the ones that kind of set the tone and set the example for this. And so this week, or throughout the rest of this series, what we're talking about is holding nothing back in each of these different areas. We're talking about finances, resources, energy, time. What does it look like? Not just what does it look like to hold nothing back in that area, but what's the outcome of it? Like, what's the benefit of it? Or what changes when we choose to unleash or unlock or not withhold from any of those areas? And so today, we're going to talk about this first one that's on the list, and we're going to talk about like specifically money, finances, that kind of whole thing. And before we jump into that, I'll go ahead and address the awkwardness, because anytime money is talked about in nearly any context, like there's awkward tension, but especially in church. Especially in church, because let's be honest, I mean, we've seen stuff manipulated, right? Like just this week, I had a friend share, he's like this staunch atheist, and he shared like this video of a pastor somewhere like in a southern state who's like trying to raise $56 million to buy like a private jet so that he could preach the gospel around the world. And it's like, okay, bro, like, American Airlines has flights for like $300, $500. Like, you really don't need like $56 million for a private jet. And like, and something like that, it's even hard. Like, I can't even like really like, part of you like wants to come like, yeah, but that's not everybody. But then at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but that is this guy. Like, that is this, there's like an example here that you can't deny. And so we've seen or heard stories of that before. Like, this isn't the first guy that's tried to purchase like a multi-million-dollar jet under the name of God, or under like the influence of a senior or lead pastor role. We've also seen money misused, right? Like, we've heard the concept, like in different situations where churches maybe have been guilty of like, embezzlement or using money kind of in a not so like, honorable way, or in a way that maybe seems like, hey, that doesn't really seem like that's necessary, or that's kind of, beyond what would be considered the norm. And so we've seen it done that way, like in church. And then, at the end of the day, like, we kind of just have speculation, right? Like, okay, so if I give this, then what happens? And so all those things, like, there's all valid reasons why like money being talked about in church can be awkward. And then that doesn't even like factor in all the pastors or church leaders who it seems like all they do is talk about money. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of times our insecurities or our awkwardness around money, or our worries or our concerns with those things, like a lot of times those things that like justifiable, valid reasons are only used to validate or justify like our internal insecurities or our internal like worries or concerns about money. It's not that they're invalid, it's that we use that to substantiate something within us where we're trying to hold on to something. More often than not, that's the case. But like there's valid reason even apart from those things to do it, right? Because money, let's talk about it. Money has like an incredible power. It has a really real big, not it's just a power to control in a negative way, but it just has a lot of power. Money can make you feel significant, and if I were to write this up on a whiteboard, the way I would write it is significant, and then in parentheses right in front of it is the word in, because it can make you either feel significant or insignificant, right? If you've got a lot of it, you feel significant. If you don't have a lot of it, you feel kind of insignificant, right? And closely tied to significance then is worth, right? We are so quick to kind of confuse or replace our financial worth with our actual self-worth. But the truth of the matter is our self-worth is so much bigger, so much greater than our financial worth. But because we can see money, we can touch money, we can connect with money, we can use it, we can leverage it, it's so easy to tie our actual worth to that. And because most of us work for other people, and so someone else is in a sense assigning your worth. They're saying you're worth X amount of dollars, you're worth X amount of pay, you're worth X amount of income. And so we then ascribe that to our personal being. Well, if this is what they say I'm worth, then that must be actually what I'm worth. And if someone else is worth more, then that must be a valid reason. Which leads kind of that third note that I jotted down of comparison, right? So you have significance, you have worth, but then comparison. It's, money has this ability to kind of make us look to things that maybe was none of our business in the first place, but yet we want to compare ourselves. The funny thing about that is that we never compare ourselves to someone who we make more money than. We only compare ourselves to the person who makes more money than us, right? And then in a city like New York, where everything is so tied and connected to money, your freaking rent, hey, you got to make 40 times the rent. So someone comes over, it's okay, well, I would guess this apartment's probably X amount of dollars, which means they've got to make this much money. And then, holy crap, they make that much money? Or man, they're broke, or whatever the case is. It's so quick and easy to just compare ourselves without even realizing that money has taken that hold over us and led us into a comparison trap. And then lastly, it's a private matter, right? You get paid however often you get paid. And whenever you get paid, that money typically goes into a bank account of some kind, and usually that account that it goes into is called what? A blank checking. What type of checking? Personal. Because it's personal. Because money is personal. I remember I had someone come at me about how much money I was making or whatever. This is a couple years ago now, and they were trying to get in my. I'm it's none of your business. You didn't care when I wasn't making anything. You didn't care when I was broke. That I wasn't, about how much money I made. And they're oh, well, don't take it personal. I'm it is personal. You know why? Because I get paid and it goes into a personal checking account. It is personal. And so money is very much a private matter, right? You have these rules at your workplace, oh, you're not supposed to talk to your coworkers about how much they get paid, but everybody does it. You'd be an idiot not to. Well, how much are you getting paid? What? I'm getting paid X K less than you? All right, I'm going back to my boss, you figure these things out. But why do they say that? Because money is a very personal thing. And so all of these things exist, right? You have comparison, you have the private matter of, or private nature of money. You have, self-worth and financial worth. You have, significance or insignificance. And all of these realities exist when it comes to talking about money. And in the context of a church, you add in the element of God, and all of a sudden, those things and the combination of money, those feelings, and God have an incredible power to make you feel really, really guilty or give you lots and lots of freedom. And what I want to do today is not speak from a point of guilt and not speak from a point of oh, this is why you should feel bad, or this is why you aren't good enough, or this is why you're a terrible person and this person's better. I don't want to play into any of that. Instead, I want to speak to the freedom that can be found when you choose to hold nothing back from God in this area. Because it's not about what you have or haven't done in the past. Not today, not in this moment. It's not about what you have or haven't done with money. It's about what you can and will do with it. It's about where you will go with it. It's about who you will become in this, because with all of these things, all of our DNA, it's not just about what we do. More importantly, it's about who we are. And so holding nothing back is not just a function of, okay, well, they said give money, so I'm going to give money. It's, no, I want to become this type of person because that's who God is. I want to hold nothing back because God held nothing back from me. And so as we kind of go into it, I want to read a passage found in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and I'll kind of read through these 14 verses. I'll talk through them, and then I have just kind of a couple points that I want to make at the end about this. And so we're going to start reading in verse 1, 2 Corinthians 8, verse 1. And here, Paul, who helped start this church in the city of Corinth. Corinth is in Greece. Paul went, helped launch this church, get it started. So Paul is now writing his second letter to them, his second letter that we have in the scriptures. He might have written more, we don't know. But this second letter is addressing some of the things that he's encountered with them, addressing some of the maybe things that he's been aware of, like you've been believers for some time, you've been Christians for some time, you've been following God for some time. There's some things that Paul needed to still address with them in a very maybe kind of stern, but also like a loving, fatherly way, because there were things that they needed to grow in. And so this passage kind of begins with Paul's heart. He says, now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. Macedonia is a totally different region. Okay, so there's another group of Christians, another group of churches that Paul has helped get off the ground. And so he's saying, hey, my brothers and my sisters, I want you to know about this other church, about this other community, and what God in his kindness is doing through them. He says, they're being tested by many troubles, and they're very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed, notice this, in rich generosity. Like there's this like distinction or a link between abundant joy and rich generosity. That even though they are poor, even though they are in trial, even though they're in trouble, that they have this joy that comes from God. Remember, he says, God in his kindness has done this. Yeah. And so out of his kindness, he's blessed them with this ability to find joy amidst their troubles, but that joy has lended itself or overflowed into generosity. He says, for I can testify that they gave not only what they could offer or what they could afford, but far more. And they did it out of their own free will. In other words, nobody forced them. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. So they were collecting some money to give to another group of Christians in the city of Jerusalem. And he says they begged us again and again. Now, I've been in church work for 11 years, 12 years almost. I've never had someone beg me to give money. Never. I've had people ask. I've had, hey, I want to help, I want to give. But I've never had someone beg. Please, Ricky, please, can I just give to this? Please. Never. Now, truth be told, I've never begged, hey, can I please absolutely give to something either? But this group of Christians in Macedonia were so moved, so stirred in their spirit, so stirred in their heart, compelled that regardless of what they were facing, they begged to be able to give. In some sense, you can almost read into this and say Paul maybe had advised them, hey, I don't think you guys need to worry about it right now. You've got enough on your plate. You've got enough going on in your lives. You have enough troubles. You're struggling to make ends meet. You're struggling to get by. You're having challenges of your own. Listen, the rest of the churches, we can take care of it. And they're saying, no, we have to do this. We've got to be a part of this. We need this because this is what God has done for us. And so they begged again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift. Verse 5, they even did more than what we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. So notice this. This is them holding nothing back from God first. And then out of choosing to hold nothing back from God, it became you know what? If we're going to hold nothing back from God, that means we also have to hold nothing back in this area of our money. And so because they gave themselves to the Lord and to us first, that was their first action, their first commitment. It became clear to them that, well, if we're going to give ourselves to God entirely, if we're going to hold nothing back from God, then we should give our money as well. So we've urged Titus, who encouraged you first who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving. Verse 7. Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, in your gifted speakers, in your knowledge, in your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I also want you to excel in this gracious act of giving. In other words, Paul was saying, listen, you held nothing back in any other area of your lives. You've taken hold of it. In fact, if you look at this verse in other translations, that word excel is translated as grow. You've grown in these areas. You've bought in. You've taken hold of these areas. And so since you've done this, your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, your love, you've held nothing back in that. But there is one area you have held back in. There is one aspect of your faith that you've not grown to the extent of these others. There is one element that you're still struggling with. There is one thing you're still choosing to hold on to, and it's this gracious act of giving. and you've grown in everything else. But listen, we've sent Titus to come and to encourage you because, listen, you've done all the things you're supposed to do, but this one area, this one space of your life is the one area that it continues to be a stronghold, continues to be a struggle in your life, and it continues to present challenge before you. Verse 8, he says, I am not commanding you to do this, but I am testing how genuine your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of the other churches. I remember the first time I came to understand the implications of this verse, and how piercing it was. Because what Paul is saying is that there's an absolute connection between my love for God and my generosity. I didn't say that. Paul said that. He said, I'm testing how genuine your love is by comparing it. Because this other group of believers, they were willing to give, even though we've excused them from doing so. Even though they had valid reasons not to. We've told them, you can hold back in this area. And they said, no, we're begging you to be a part of it. And so I am testing. I'm not forcing you to give. I can't twist your arm and say, hey, you have to be a part of this. But I can test how genuine your love is. And so Paul says that there's an absolute connection between our love for God and our response with money. Which also means there's an absolute competition between our love for God and our love for money. And it's not that God is trying to beat or outbest money. It's that money is trying to outbest God. And so Paul says, I'm not commanding you to do this, but listen, I'm taking notes. I'm watching, I'm observing, I'm looking to see, is this love that you speak of, is this faith that you have, how sincere is it? How genuine is it? Because there is no love apart from sacrifice. You can't say, from a distance, God could not have said, hey, I love you people, but I refuse to send my son. I refuse to let Jesus die for your sins, but I love you. All of us would feel that's cheap. It's hollow. It means nothing. But because he sent his son, because his son died for us, because his son was willing to give it all, even to the point of death, we can look and say, yeah, we know God loves us, because if somebody died for you, you don't have to question whether or not they love you. And so because he died, we know that we're loved. Because he sacrificed, we know that we're loved. And so there's this distinction that how much you sacrifice or how, is connected to the authenticity or how genuine your love actually is. Verse 9. And this is why. This is where it comes from. You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. You see, Jesus gave us what we couldn't obtain or what we couldn't have so that we could become who we couldn't be apart from him. He gave us what we couldn't get. He gave us what we couldn't obtain so that we could become who we couldn't be apart from him. And so through his death, through his resurrection, we now inherit the richness that God intended for his son. Scriptures say we become his heirs. We become joint heirs with Jesus. In other words, if you've got some sort of lineage, if you ever follow along any sort of famous people that have money passed down to them, we get that from God. What was entitled to Jesus has now become ours because Jesus held nothing back. And so we became rich. These Corinthians at this church, they became rich. They didn't recognize it, or maybe they forgot about it, but in that moment, Paul was writing to say, listen, you know the generous grace of God. You know the generous grace of Jesus, because this is who you became through what he did. Verse 10. So here is my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have. Whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly, and give according to what you have, not what you don't have. Verse 13. Of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourself. So Paul's not saying, hey, make yourself broke. Don't pay your bills. Don't eat food. Paul's not saying that. I think that's sometimes, right, that's what we do in our minds. Whoa, he's saying I got to give. But, what if I can't pay this? What if I can't do this? And we think about Paul's no, that's not what God's asking. I'm not telling you to cripple yourself for the sake of this, unless that's a specific word that what God was saying, but that's not a general rule or a best practice. Like, it really isn't. And Paul is saying that. It's like, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourselves. I only mean that there should be some equality. Verse 14, right now you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. So there's a whole lot that goes on in this passage, and there's a whole lot that I could probably spend an afternoon or 2 days talking about. But instead of kind of dissecting all this stuff over there, I really just kind of want to zoom in on these last 4 verses from 10 through 14. And the things that Paul speaks in, I want to kind of make 2 comments on that I think are beneficial for us, but also helpful for who we become. Because sometimes we're not always aware of what God's done or how God has done it. And we're not always aware of the implications for us or what we're doing and what areas we're holding back in or how we hold back. And so from these kind of verses, I just want to share a couple of things. And the first one is this, what you have is more than what you think. The first major thought I'll share with you is that what you have is more than what you think. In verse 12, Paul writes, whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly, and give according to what you have, not what you don't have. What you have, not what you don't have. In some sense, what the Corinthian church was guilty of was saying, well, we don't have X, Y, Z, so we can't do A, B, C. We don't have enough to give. We don't have this that we can hand over. We don't have this that we can send. And we don't have this compared to so-and-so. We don't have this because I didn't make enough last year, or we didn't have this because of whatever reason. But Paul was saying, what you have is actually more than what you give. They minimized what they had to the point that they were unwilling to give anything. But Paul was saying, give according to what you have, not what you don't have. And I think, we're quick to minimize what we have. We're quick to kind of reduce it and say, well, this doesn't matter, or this isn't significant, or this isn't going to make much of a difference, or this isn't even going to put a dent in the place. Real simple example, but we talked about raising money for the kids in need, at Cayuga centers and purchasing supplies. And the first couple of days, talking about it, people gave, and that was fine. But the moment that I broke it down and said, hey, here's the goal, $2,500, and here's what it equates to is about $10 per kid. The number of people that started giving, went up. Now, we're still, we didn't reach the goal, and, we're still a ways off from it. But the number of people who all of a sudden felt oh, I can give $10. But when it was this huge sum, they're I don't have anything to give. But when it became something no, give what you can, give according to what you have, and everyone, or most everyone, can give $10, people all of a sudden started saying, oh yeah, I can do that. I'll give 10, I'll give 20, I'll give 50, I'll give 100. And that became kind of tangible for people because what they had done before was minimize what they had. And they didn't realize that what you have is more than what you think. And this is such a massive kind of issue for all of us because we live not only in an expensive city, but we kind of reduce what we do have. And here's the mind-boggling thing. Without knowing any of your personal bank statements, I know this much about your finances. Whatever you earn this year puts you in the top 2% of income earners in the world. Whatever you earn this year. If you are making more than $25,000 this calendar year, you are in the top 2% of income earners on the planet. Wow. On the planet. If you're making more than $32,500, you are in the top 0.99% of income earners on the planet. So we can talk politically about the top 1%, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of us are in the top 1% globally. And what we have is more than what we think. When 99.1% of the world's population lives beneath an income level that we ourselves make, we have way more than what we think. And that's, again, not a guilt thing, but that's a perspective thing. That's to help reframe our vision, to reframe and recalibrate our understanding. And I'm going to speak for a moment in kind of a personal manner, speak to kind of more my experience or my story with this. Because, I started giving to church when I was 18. And, I was a freshman in college. I was going to a Bible school because I wanted to be a pastor. So I knew, what the Bible said about giving. I understood that. I knew, I wanted to give, and I was, making money. And so, I would give. And then this is, 2004. And so 2005, I have to like file taxes or whatever. I get like my giving statement. And I remember like doing the math, and I'm pretty good at math, but not the 10% fractions are like really difficult either. But I could like look really quick and see, okay, I made this much money, which wasn't much. It was probably like $5,000 or something like, I thought I was rich at the time, but like $5,000 or whatever. But what I had given amounted to about like 3% of like my annual income. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh wow, like that's a lot less than I thought I was giving. Like that's shocking. But I had new sneakers, of course. I had, plenty of like eating out like experiences with friends. I had a cell phone, and I was paying for text messages, which wasn't included at the time, 10 cents a message. So I was balling. I was balling in all these other areas of my life, but I realized like, whoa, I didn't even give like a 10% like level. And so like it was, for me, I was like, man, like I want to, give more. So the next year I gave, and it like, I don't remember the percentage amount that I gave, but it still wasn't 10%, 2005 calendar year. And so like, 2006, somewhere around there is like, I think when I first started like actually like giving 10% of my income. And since then I've not stopped giving at least 10% of my income. But I will tell you this, like there have been multiple times, plenty of times where like what I had was less than what I thought it was. Where I was tempted to say, God, like, nah, I can't afford to this month. A couple times where like I was legit like on the brink of not doing it, and then some divine circumstance where it brings like a wake-up call. So I say all that to say this, like for me, just because I'm the pastor, just because I'm leader, like I understand like the vulnerability in this. Like I understand the challenge in this. And even, a couple years ago when I was transitioning from South Carolina to New York, and like I didn't have like a steady income, I didn't know when like my next paycheck was gonna come in, and still felt God was like leading us to like give. It was like, all right, God, like, well, like where this money's gonna come from. Like you have to kind of fill the gaps, because I don't know how we make do, like, when we're living off of like a certain budget. And all of that like was, it's been a learning process. I say that to say like it's been a learning process for me. But the story that I really want to share with you is a story where God really kind of took this and highlighted, like, helped me see that like in any circumstance, in nearly every situation that I'm in life, what I have is way more than what I think. And it started in 2015. October 2015, I spent 2 weeks down in Australia, and I was spending time with some of Hillsong Church and their teams and their ministries. And I was talking with a guy who kind of provides oversight and leadership globally for like one of their giving ministries. And this guy is a volunteer. He owns a business, and started, kind of leading through his giving. And he, like back in the early 90s, Pastor Brian came to him and said, hey, Andrew, I want you to be involved in this kind of new ministry that we're starting called Kingdom Builders. And here's what it's going to take is like you to give $5,000 above your tithe. Like we're looking for giving leaders. They had all their reasons, their purposes for it, all that stuff. So to give $5,000 above the tithe. And Andrew was like, at the time, he's like, I was a plumber. He's like, how am I going to give $5,000 more than like my already 10%? And I don't know what his annual income was, but it was $5,000 above his 10% giving. And so he was like freaking out about it, started praying, and then felt like God was saying, hey, you need to do this. So he took a step of faith and he did it. 3 years later, he gave $15,000. Like he was able to triple like the $5,000, so $15,000 more than like his tithe. 8 years later, he had given $1 million like to the church. Like God had just kind of like connected these dots for him, and business opportunities, and he got in like construction and all this stuff opened up. And so 8 years from the time he was barely able to give $5,000 more, he was able to give in total over those 8 years $1 million to the church. And I remember having this conversation with him. This guy's like in his 60s, super great guy. And I remember thinking like in my head, I was like 5,000 more than tithe. Like what would it take for me to give like 5,000 more than my tithe? At the time I was making about $50K a year. So it's like, literally I'm like doubling. I'm going from like a 10% like giving to 20%. I'm like, man, like how do I can't afford to do that like right now. So I'm like trying to think like what is it that I do? But I was like so stirred in my spirit to like want to do this. And I just like was like praying and thinking through like, when can I do this? How could I do this? And so as I'm processing through that, God started to speak to me about what I had that I wasn't taking account of. And at the time, part of what I had was a 2013 Jeep Wrangler, which was completely paid off, and it was like my dream car. And someone had paid for it. Someone had bought it for me. and someone had like completely gifted it to us. I didn't owe a payment on it. I didn't owe a penny on it. And he's like, well, you've got this Jeep that's valued at around like $28,000. Like, what do you mean? Like, how do you do this? And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, like, how do I do this without having to like deal with that Jeep thing, right? Like, like I guess I could sell it and get like an older Jeep or something, but I'm like, I really, really like this Jeep. And God just started speaking like over the course of about 3 months, October, November, December, and then into January. But the first week of January, I knew, I'm like, I've got to sell this car. And it wasn't to sell it so that I could give $5,000 just so that I could say, oh, I did it. Because I knew, I was like, no, like I don't want this to just be like I did it one time and that's it. Like I want to like build to this. I still had some debt in my life. We had a car payment. We had a student loan payment that I was making. And so I knew what I could do is I could like sell this Jeep, buy a different car, the Toyota Highlander that I have now, buy that car, take the difference, pay off like my car loan debt, work to my student loan. My car loan was like $275 a month. I'm like, all right, if I take that and like that becomes part of like my generosity budget instead of like, a car payment, like I could work my way and like, within time do that. And so like we did, Chris and I like prayed through, knew like that was what we were supposed to do. And so we moved forward with it, paid off the car, started working through things. And December of this past year, 2017, was the first time that we were able to give $5,000 more than our tithe. 2 years later, and I don't say that to like brag on me, like because it's not about like, wow, look at them. But like I say that to realize like what I had was more than what I thought. And I was trying to minimize what I had. Well, God, like, I make $50K a year, like that's 20%. Like literally if I give 20%, I can't like pay the rest of my bills and like provide for my family and, all these things. And so it was at the time, like minimizing what God had given to me. But then when he started revealing that, all of a sudden I realized like, no, like I have more than what I think. And if I leverage what I have, if I give what I have according to what I have, God can take what I've given and multiply it out faster in a quicker period of time than I ever thought imaginable. Now, the mind-boggling thing about that is that last year, I didn't work for 2 months out of the year. I didn't have an income until like the end of February. I moved to the most expensive city in the country. I have like, a rent that's like 4 times the price of my mortgage in South Carolina. My bills increased, my expenses increased, my income increased, thank God. But like what God had provided and how God had provided had become such that I was able to give a number in excess of a number that 2 years ago felt impossible. But it was this reality and realization that what I had is more than what I thought. And so I chose to give according to what I had, not what I didn't have. Because if I focused on what I didn't have, I would have just said, no, I can't do it, God. I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to make that move. I'm not going to, take that step because, God, I can't do it. And instead, God said, no, work with what you do have, and then watch me take care of the rest. So what you have is more than what you think. The second thing I'll share with you is this. There's opportunity for equality in the church. There's opportunity for equality in the church. Paul wrote in verse 13, of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourselves. I only mean that there should be some equality. Right now, you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. Now, here's the thing about equality. We love equality when it comes to rights. Like, we love equality when it comes to rights. Women's rights, like pro-life rights, like all these different like rights that we speak of. We love equality when it comes to that, but we don't love equality when it comes to responsibility. Like, we love it in rights, but we don't love it in responsibility. Yeah, in theory, all things should be equal. But if it requires me to do something about it, good God, I can't do that. Like, forget it. That should be someone else's responsibility. Someone else should do that. Because again, we, like the previous point, minimize what we have and underestimate it. But Paul was challenging the church. Listen, things need to be equal. You are in a season where you have more. And this church who has less has been eager and begging to give. And you've withheld when you have opportunity and reason and resource to give. You've held back even though they've not held anything back. And yet, like Paul was saying, like this point that like things should be equal. And the fact of the matter is, like the truth is there's more life change to be experienced. There's more transformation to take place. There's more opportunities to connect people, to reach more people. The vision for Meta Church is greater than what the resources we have currently, but it doesn't mean that we should stop at it or we should say, well, one day someone who's a big giver will come in and take care of everything that we have. That's not the way to operate. That's not the way to function. We say, no, this is what we do have. Here, let's raise the bar in equality and let's do something, because I've talked to you about this before, and I know there's a couple people new, so this is you kind of stepping into this. But giving at Meta Church has been mind-boggling good to me. Phenomenal. It's been I just to kind of show you a chart, and Alex, I think you'll appreciate this. But when you look at internal giving versus external giving, so external giving is the money that comes from people who aren't a part of this community. And then the internal giving, of course, is us, in this room. And so when you look at our year to date, the percentage, it is wild, how through this, 12 people in a room, not only are bills paid, but we have resources to help other people, to give. We've given away 11% of every penny, that's come in, or every dollar that's come in. And so we give a lot as well, but to think that 83% happens from in here. On paper, it shouldn't make sense. It really shouldn't. When I tell people that this is where our giving is, other pastors or, church finance experts, they're man, that's tremendous, this is where you're at. But the truth is, we have opportunity for equality. Because if you take this part of the chart, right, this 83% of the internal giving, and then you create a new chart, of 100, that would total 100%, here's how the breakdown goes. 27% comes from a majority, while 73% comes from 3 households. So nearly 3/4 of our giving, basically if you take $1, 73 cents out of every dollar given comes from 3 households in this group. 27% comes from the rest. And again, I don't want to guilt or shame people, because that's not what this is about. All this says to me is that, hey, we have a huge opportunity for equality. To grow, to excel, as Paul said, to take steps forward. And that's a good thing, because again, holding nothing back is not just a function that we do, it's an identity that we become. And so we become someone, we become people that can hold nothing back. We can become people that choose to say, you know what, here's an opportunity for me to step up. Here's an opportunity for me to grow. Here's an opportunity to say, God, you've held nothing back from me, so I'm going to hold nothing back from you. And yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, it's challenging. Yeah, it can be frustrating, or it can be discouraging, or it can be hard, or it can be sacrificial, or it can be all of these things. But the good news is, God didn't make that an excuse for him to stop for us. And so because he not only set an example of what it looks like, he also set an example of, hey, if I did this, if I was willing to go this far, I can help you go this far as well. In this thing, I love how Paul puts that. He's excel, but again, the word can mean grow. He wasn't just slamming them. He didn't say I'm not commanding you to do this. He was recognizing, hey, there's space and there's bandwidth for this to become something that you grow in, something that you become. I'm not putting this hard, fast bit in your mouth to say, hey, you've got to do this right now. I'm going to tug at you until you get it right. He's saying you have an opportunity to grow, and we do too. And the kind of last comment I'll make on this is that a reminder, with all of this, we set the tone. We set the example. And so if we reach people, if we connect with people, if we invite people in and we're saying, yeah, we hold nothing back, but we are holding back, we can't get mad or angry when they hold something back as well. We can't look and say, oh, well, how come, these people aren't doing this, or how come they're not giving, or how come they're not serving, or how come they're not loving, or how come they're not doing these steps, and we ourselves are saying, no, I'm holding back. I'm hanging on to something. So it's an opportunity to grow. And so I want to share, kind of just in closing, 3 simple ways that you can grow. Easy, practical, very simple, okay? In short, you can give more, you can spend less, you can pay debts. Okay? So give more. Pretty self-explanatory. You give a dollar amount, you can increase your dollar amount. You give a percentage, you can increase your percentage. You say, okay, well, I want to set a goal. I want to get to 10%. Great. I'm at whatever percent I'm at now. And you say, okay, well, by this mark, I want to be at this percentage, and by this date, I want to be at this point. And you can build your way up to that. right? You can grow in that area. You give a dollar amount and you say, you know what, like I've been given this dollar amount, yeah, it's 10%, but like it's only 10%. Like I've been given 10% for however long of my life. And so like, you know what, it's time for me to grow. Like, yeah, I hit that benchmark, but I've not taken a step beyond that. I've not grown beyond that. I've not like, you know, taken a risk or a step of faith above that. So you can give more. You can spend less. That's about a priority, right? Like you can say, okay, you know what, like I could give more, but this portion of my budget is like way out of control. Like, I don't know if you guys ever look at like your statement or like if your banks or your credit cards give you like a breakdown of like where your money goes. But like, back in the day when Toys R Us existed, like God bless his soul, like my statement would tell me like my American Express card would tell me like, oh, this is how much is like Toys R Us. I'm like, I don't care about that. I'm like, wait, what? Like I spent that much money at Toys R Us? Like, you know, I got one kid. Like, you know, how am I spending this much percentage? Like you could break it down in a percentage on my credit card. Like Toys R Us gets its own category. Like this is absurd. This doesn't even make sense. You know, like we could spend less. Just say, you know, like there's an area of my budget that I need to cut back on. There's an area of my spending that like I can say, you know what, this is going to be where I like sacrifice so that I can give more. Again, I don't like set myself as the only example, but I speak from my own experience. Like I could have very easily said, you know what, $275, pay off that car debt. Boom, baby, I got $275 of spending money to do whatever I want. And instead of saying, you know what, no, I'm going to spend more, I'm going to say, no, I'm going to give more. And so if I need to give more, I still have a limited budget. So I have to spend less in order to do so. And so you could spend less. Lastly, you can pay off debts. Now, this is critical because we live in such a world that like debt is okay. It's like, you know, good debt, bad debt, like all these kind of arguments, all this stuff. But it's so normal to carry on debt. But the truth of the matter is debt like kind of weighs on you. Debt is a burden. Debt is like this thing that like, it messes with your mind, your heart, like your spirit. And no one gets that credit card statement and thinks to themselves, man, I'm glad I spent all that money last month. Like we don't. In the moment we are, right? Like, because, you know, Zara had a sale or whatever, and, you know, like, I just know my people. You know, or Nike had like a $10 off gift card if you spend $300. Like, well, I don't want to lose money on this. And like, you know, and so like we rack up the debt in the moment, but then you get that statement, you're like, I don't feel good about that. Like I personally use a credit card. Okay, I'm not anti-credit card. I use one, and like I make deliberate choices on that credit card. But when I still get my statement, I'm like, man, I really spent that much on my credit card? Like, I really wanted to do that? Like, was this worth it? Like, because I'm like, I don't like this idea of carrying debt. And I don't, like I pay off my debts every single month. But there have been times in my season where I've carried thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And the burden that I felt, the weight that I carried financially of like, how do I ever get out from under this? It just felt like impossible. And it doesn't mean you just like make this all out commitment, okay, I need to pay off everything and I need to wait till I can give, because again, it's about who you become. So if it's about who you become, like Paul said, give according to what you have, because according to what you have is acceptable if you do it with genuine love. But like, don't say, well, I'm going to give this much because I want to pay off debt, but then really I'm actually just taking spend more. Like, I'm not going to give more because I want to pay off my debt, but I stop paying off my debt so that I can spend more. Like, that's dishonest. And so these simple ways are like really, really easy. Like, I say easy, I should say they're simple, not easy. They're practical, they're beneficial, they're helpful. But they're ways that we can all grow in this, that we can all excel. Like, I can look at this and say, okay, yeah, like, where can I spend less? I may not have debts, but I do spend. So, like, is there an area of my spending that's either out of line or prohibitive to me doing this, to giving more? Is there somewhere where I can grow? Is there an opportunity for me to look and say, okay, well, I want to give more, I want to do more? And like, that took time, because 12 years ago, that's not who I was. In fact, I'll kind of, you know, wrap up with this last story and then share one more scripture with you. But when I moved to South Carolina from New York, one of the things that I realized was that like materialism and greed had, you know, taken like a stranglehold in my heart. Not like in a showy, like, whoa, look at this, you know, we're in Prada slides, you know, like I was just talking about this yesterday. Like I saw some at Nordstrom for $800. I'm like, these things, they're so hard and stiff. I'm like, these are like the ones my mom used to beat me with as a kid. Like who's gonna spend $800 to beat their child? But not because I was like showy, but because in my mind I just wanted to spend and spend and spend. And so greed and materialism had like really taken root in my heart. And God told me the only way you're gonna break this cycle in your life is through generosity. The only way you're gonna be able to get through this is generosity. Now at the time, we had almost $30,000 worth of debt. And so like I could easily have written it off and say, you know what, I can't do it, God. When I pay this off, I'll get to that. God's like, no, like this isn't about money, this is about your heart. And an enemy has waged war against you and you've allowed him to have your heart in this area. And so if you want to break it, if you want to overcome this, if you want to defeat this enemy in your life, it's going to require that you take action today, not tomorrow. Yeah. It's going to require that you break those chains starting now with what you can, not waiting until 2 or 3 years down. And fingers crossed, maybe you'll be in a better position financially. And so making that decision in my life, I mean, Crystal will tell you I'm a totally different person. But in making that decision, my heart was changed, my heart was renewed, and generosity, like, isn't not as like an issue. It's an issue for me when I'm like, man, we haven't been generous like to someone or something like in a couple months. Like, who can we bless? What can we do? How can we do this? Like, what can I sacrifice so that I can like give to someone else? Because that's who I've become. And in the process, here's what happened. Off of a single income, making $50K a year, paying food, paying groceries, paying rent, like all that stuff, we paid off nearly $30,000 of debt in 17 months. And so God took care of that. But it was because I made the commitment to do that. It was because I followed this verse. Isaiah 32:8. My favorite verse in all of Scripture is about generosity. Generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. In fact, he says, but there was an excuse before. There was a reason before. There was a justification before. But generous people plan to do. Get that? To do? That's the decision point. That's the moment when things change. When you decide, this is what I'm going to do. Why? Because this is who I am. It's an identity first, generous people, and then an action or behavior next. Plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. So when we give, when we speak about giving, when we speak about equality, when we talk about stepping into a season of holding nothing back, we speak from this standpoint, not from a shame or a guilt or from like a what we didn't do in the past, but from a this day forward, you deciding this is who I'm going to become. I'm going to become a generous person. I'm going to stand firm in my generosity. I'm going to do what is generous because that's what God did on my behalf. No matter what's happening in my life, no matter the challenges, no matter like the frustrations or the discouragements or the justifications, I'm going to choose to be generous. What is the most generous thing I could do in this situation? And when you choose to become that, you choose to become the type of person that can proudly say, God, you held nothing back from me, and I'm holding nothing back from you. Let me pray for us.